Tonight, we're breaking a story that hits right at the heart of the American family. It starts with a father's desperate search for his missing children, but it's exploded into a full-scale constitutional war, not just on one judge's ruling, but on the entire family court system as we know it.
And at the center of it all is a stunning allegation that the system isn't broken, but that it's actually designed to profit from family conflict. The claim is that federal financial incentives are turning parents into revenue streams and, tragically, children into collateral. We're going to walk you through exactly how, based on the court documents themselves.
You see, this whole legal battle started with a very personal, very urgent crisis. For the man at the center of this, Timothy DeHara, this fight is anything but abstract. He alleges that for months, he was completely cut off from his children. And now, according to his emergency court filings, they've just vanished.
And when you look at his emergency motion filed directly with the court, the picture it paints is absolutely stark. It alleges his wife violated her domestic violence probation and has fled the state with all 4 of their children. His access, which was already being restricted for months, has now been totally and completely severed.
Now, according to these filings, this didn't just happen in a vacuum. He claims there was a whole pattern of systemic failure. Police, he says, refused to enforce probation terms. Mandatory protection orders were just ignored. Even reports of educational neglect, he says, were flat out dismissed. And each alleged failure, he argues, just allowed this crisis to get worse and worse.
So you have to ask yourself, is this just the tragic but isolated story of one family falling apart, or, as this lawsuit argues, is it a symptom of a much, much bigger crisis, one that's actually built into the very architecture of our family law system?
Okay, so to really get what's at the core of this constitutional challenge, you need to understand a federal program called Title 4D. In simple terms, it's the system that gives federal money to states to enforce child support. But here's the crucial part. States get more money based on how much they collect and how many enforcement actions they take. It's performance-based.
Now, the lawsuit argues this financial incentive creates what it calls a systemic funnel. It all starts, they claim, with no-fault divorce, which they argue basically destroys the marriage contract. From there, it alleges that unproven claims can be weaponized to get immediate custody, which lets the state step in under a very vague best interest of the child standard. And the final step? Financial extraction, through child support orders that generate state revenue through those Title 4D kickbacks.
And we're not talking about small change here. The numbers cited in these legal filings are just staggering. They estimate this system generates over $200 million in annual revenue for the state of Colorado alone. That directly ties this legal process to a very powerful financial motive. You know, this idea of state coercion isn't coming out of nowhere. Just for context, a Stanford Law Review article pointed out a similar dynamic in the foster care system. It described how financial pressures can push state agencies to, and I quote, coerce a surrender of fundamental constitutional rights, often without any real legal checks and balances. So this sets up a fundamental conflict, a collision between what the system says it does and what this lawsuit alleges it actually does. On one side, you have the stated goal, protect the best interest of the child, but on the other, the alleged reality, a system designed to maximize federal money by, in the words of the filing, tyrannizing parents.
And the lawsuit directly challenges that best interest standard by pointing to some really tough data on what actually happens when families are separated. Research cited in the source materials is sobering. It suggests that kids from fatherless homes are 4 times more likely to live in poverty, an incredible 20 times more likely to end up incarcerated, and 7 times more likely to face teen pregnancy.
And this is where you get to the central, devastating paradox of the whole thing. The argument is that the system's financial incentives actually encourage the removal of fathers, which then fuels the very social problems like poverty and crime that the system claims it exists to prevent. And the filings argue this is no accident. In fact, they say it might be the entire point. They point to research from the American Economics and Law Review, which found that custody, who gets the kids, is the single most important factor in who files for divorce. The lawsuit argues that this makes the fight for children the very engine that feeds this whole alleged revenue-generating machine.
So what's really important to understand about the legal strategy here is that this is what's known as a facial challenge. What that means is they're not just arguing that these laws were applied unfairly in one specific case. No, they're arguing that the laws themselves, in their very design, are unconstitutional for everyone.
Okay, so the whole case really stands on three huge constitutional pillars. First, the Contracts Clause. The argument is that no-fault divorce creates a marriage contract with no enforceable terms. Second, due process, claiming fundamental parental rights are being taken away without a real, meaningful hearing, and they cite huge Supreme Court cases like Troxel versus Granville. And third, equal protection, alleging these laws are systematically enforced with a clear bias against fathers.
Now, anytime you try to do something like this, you run into a major legal roadblock. It's a doctrine called younger abstention. Basically, it's a principle that keeps federal courts from sticking their nose into ongoing state court cases. It's a huge hurdle.
But here's the really clever part of their legal argument. The memorandum says this case is the exception to that rule. Why? Because it's a facial attack on the laws themselves. And because, they allege, the state courts are so biased, they're actually part of the problem. So federal intervention isn't just appropriate, they argue it's absolutely necessary.
So it's not just about tearing the system down. The filings actually lay out a roadmap for what they believe should replace it. They're calling for sweeping changes, abolish no-fault divorce, require a much higher standard of evidence before you can remove a child, and establish a legal presumption of joint custody for any fit parent, just to name a few.
And all of this legal strategy is really built on a core philosophy, one they back up with academic research. This quote really gets to the heart of it, the idea that the protective benefit of having a father in the home is so powerful that it far outweighs any potential risks. It's a benefit the lawsuit claims the current system is actively destroying.
When you boil it all down, the ultimate goal here is powerful and frankly pretty profound. It's to restore the family unit as the fundamental bedrock of our society and to build a shield around it to protect it from what the lawsuit calls unconstitutional interference from the state. It's a battle with absolutely massive implications. It started with one family's personal crisis, and it's become a fundamental challenge against the state's self, and it leaves all of us with a deeply unsettling question. If these allegations are true, that the very systems designed to protect families are actually undermining them for profit, then what foundation is left?